Bob, you spent many years essentially dedicated to your life to understanding and ultimately preventing corrosion. Through your publishing and in your work, you become a central figure in this study. Talk to us about why preventing corrosion is so important.
Well, first let me start off by saying you will never get rid of corrosion. There'll always be corrosion. It's a fact because every metal other than gold and platinum is susceptible to corrosion by either oxygen or water, both. And even gold and platinum, we've corroded them given the right conditions. So as long as you're going to be using metals, and even if you switch everything to plastics, you're going to have metals in making the plastics. However we make the plastic, you can't avoid it. So as long as we're around, humans are around, we're going to have to worry about corrosion.
So the first thing is, rust never sleeps. I heard that from somebody else. But it's a good point. So from the standpoint of the infrastructure, which is the topical issue
right.
around corrosion, I don't know, just your thoughts about the future, about the effect of things like the crisis in Michigan
right.
with the water quality and things like that.
Infrastructure is probably the most costly place corrosion occurs. It's everywhere. And as you said, the Flint water crisis right now, it's a perfect example of that. Just a simple fact that they switched from one source of water to another. They went from a condition where the lead was protected to where it corroded and did its damage. Mm-hmm. So most people don't even think of pipes, but it's not just water pipes. A gas pipe can explode, and it's happened mm-hmm. all too frequently. And it's more often than not, it's a corrosion problem. Mm-hmm. One that's very visible, bridges. Every now and then, maybe 10, 20 years between incidents. But when they happen, the bridge collapses, usually there's a large loss of life. And again, it's not taking care of our infrastructure. I think that's one place, certainly in this country, and I imagine around the world, where we see so much of that people, countries are just not willing to put the money into maintaining mm-hmm. infrastructure. I just thought of a story here. Matter of fact, I was in a foreign country. I don't want to name it. And actually, I didn't witness this, but it was a group of us, and one of my colleagues witnessed this. A large bridge, a long bridge, connecting the mainland to an island. And the only access to this island, the bridge was closed, essentially permanently. After it had been open, I forget now, but it was something of the order of 1-2 years, very short lifetime. They had to close it. Why? The contractor used seawater to make the concrete for the bridge. And the seawater containing salt corroded the rebars that were supporting the concrete. I don't know if it was accidental or on purpose, but the results were the same.
Well, even so you don't know in that case, but I think the ignorance associated with being able to solve problems. It goes to the importance of understanding corrosion science, of electrochemistry. The Flint, Michigan water issue, we had one of our editors, well, a colleague of yours, Jerry Frankenthal, do an editorial piece for us on his thinking of that. And in so many words, he said, had they known a little bit more about corrosion, material science, electrochemistry, there were some reasonable solutions to that problem had they been applied.
Yeah.
And it just emphasizes the importance of not just maintaining the infrastructure, but on funding corrosion research and to help people solve these problems.
What we find in this country, at least, is that you can plot the number of dollars being spent on corrosion research against incidences like bridges collapsing, this, and you see shortly after there's a major disaster, the government and industry funds corrosion research, and then it slowly drops off until it's down to less than the bare minimum.
Shouldn't have to wait for a tragedy, should we?
Unfortunately.
I'd like to just get you to speak about how you got into corrosion science. So, which means in our case, is starting at the beginning. You were born in Berlin, spent your very early years there. Tell us about that.
I don't really remember much about that. What I do remember is probably crucial to the way I am today and the way I've been most of my life. It was not particularly pleasant. It was a time that I was born just before Hitler came to power, and I'm Jewish and my parents are, and we suffered like all our brethren did there. And for example, I had to go to a school just for Jews. I couldn't go to the normal school. You know, I can't say what direct effect that had on me, but I just feel it must have had some effect on me which shaped the way I am today. But other than that, I really can't tell you very much.
Okay, came to the United States then in 1938, right? So then what? Then what?
Okay, well, I guess I have to talk a little bit about my family. Because you can imagine, I spoke no English at all, not a word. I was 8 years old. My parents, I think, knew a little bit of English, but not enough to get by in an environment where nobody else spoke their language, German. So basically, we all had to learn German. My parents had to find ways of making a living. We weren't allowed to take any money out of Germany, so we came with some goods and so on. For instance, we didn't have to worry about buying clothes. I know my mother had lots of clothes made or bought because we could take out goods. But still, you had to earn a living in order to have housing, in order to have food and everything else. So they had to worry about that. And in Germany, I assume we were middle class. I think we, not neither wealthy nor poor, probably pretty average. And now you drop all of a sudden in the middle of your life, my parents, that is, down to where you have nothing at all. So it had to be very hard. I was lucky and unfortunate at the same time. Some person or welfare society, I have no idea who or what organization, to make it a little easier for my parents, sponsored me to go to a boarding school. I'd be out of their hair, at least they could work to get settled.
Where was this?
I'm sorry?
And where?
Oh, well, they actually, for a few months I went to one down outside of Washington in Maryland, I believe it was. But then for 2 years I went to one up on Croton-on-Hudson in upstate New York. I came home, of course, for holidays and vacations, but basically for almost 3 years I was away from home. Sideline to this is, by the time I came home, I couldn't speak German anymore. I spoke only English. I could understand everything that was said to me, but I couldn't speak. I had to relearn how to speak German. But what I was getting at really is being away from home basically for almost 3 years must have had an effect on me. I certainly couldn't have been very happy about that. So it was difficult. And life was very difficult for my parents. I went to school and so on. Other than the conditions under which we lived, I didn't have it that bad. But I remember I was embarrassed to bring friends to the house and so on. It wasn't bad, but whereas people I met lived in nice apartments in New York City, we lived in a little furnished apartment. We had to walk up a bunch of flights of stairs and so on. It just wasn't the same. So I know that was embarrassing. So in these senses, it was difficult. And my guess is, my feeling is that my outlet for all this was school. I did well in school, and that's what I was interested in. And I let other things, social things, slide.
When did you begin to get an interest in the sciences?
I honestly don't know. From the beginning, I was interested in arithmetic, math. I know all the way through, from the lowest grade on through high school, I was very much interested in that. I didn't have any real science courses until my junior year in high school, when I had physics. Then my senior year, I had chemistry. And I think I knew before then that I wanted to go into one of the physical sciences. I can't tell you why or how I knew that. I was looking forward to these two courses. But, and then I made the decision to go into chemistry.
Is that why you selected University of Rochester? Was that based on your interest?
No, that's a very different story. Again, I had been very fortunate. I went to a private high school, a very good one. And I got there because my mother happened to know one of the teachers there, and she had suggested I take an exam, an exam to get into the school. As a result of the exam, they offered me a full scholarship. Otherwise, I wouldn't have gone
Good choice.
there. But it had its negative side, too, because most of the other students came from rather wealthy homes. And I just didn't interact well with them. I did well in the classroom, but not outside. Anyway, when it came time to make a decision about college, it was assumed by my family and me I would go to City College in New York, which was free at the time, and an excellent schools, turned out many Nobel Prize winners. Matter of fact, Alan Bard went there, I understand. Right. But the advisor at the school said I needed to get away from home. He could tell that I was socially, probably, I'm not sure what word he used, not that mature. And my parents managed, with a scholarship, managed to send me to the University of Rochester. The advisor made a list of schools I should apply to. Rochester was at the top. I got in, so I went there.
And was it there that you took up chemistry, or one of the
I went there knowing I was.
Okay.
I decided my senior year that chemistry was what I wanted. And
what about the faculty? Were there influential people there that helped you in your next steps?
Faculty was very interesting, with, well, I won't say one exception. I'm not sure where everyone stood, but certainly the first 2 years, the faculty, I think, was more there to teach than to do research. The faculty in organic and physical chemistry was there more to do research than to teach. And they were by far, well, faculty in the first 2 years were influential in taking care of us, in the sense that the help we needed. They were wonderful teachers. Got to physical chemistry my junior year, and, well, both physical and organic chemistry. And you talk to other students in the university, and they all said, organic chemistry is a marvelous course. The teacher is superb. But stay away from physical chemistry. As a chemistry major, of course, I had to take physical chemistry. Professor Noyes, who taught physical chemistry, was by most students considered a demon. Stay as far away from him as you can. And I had exactly the opposite reaction. I didn't care for the organic chemistry course. I had no opinion on the professor who taught it, but it didn't interest me for whatever reason. And physical chemistry, I just swallowed up. And once you got to understand how Professor Noyes taught, you knew how to react. And basically, he taught to the top 10 to 20% of the class and didn't give a damn about the rest. If you happen to be in that upper portion of the class, you learn more physical chemistry. Matter of fact, I found out when I went to graduate school that my background in physical chemistry was far advanced from all the other students except one. That was a fellow who came from Harvard. So it tells you something about chemistry at Rochester, at least physical chemistry.
Well, and I have a theory too. I think those corrosion scientists are a little bit of a different breed anyway. So having had a few presidents that have been corrosion scientists, so you know.
I knew nothing about corrosion science as an undergraduate. Even in graduate school, I didn't really know corrosion science. I learned electrochemistry. It was only when I went out to work afterwards, after I got my degree, that I got into corrosion.
Well, let's say a little bit more about your PhD at University of Wisconsin,
Right.
Where you just said you began to study electrochemistry, right? And so just maybe a little bit about your experience or the people that were there.
Very interesting, because I went there wanting to do work in gas phase reaction mechanisms and kinetics with Professor Daniels, who was a world expert in the field. It was the same field that Professor Noyes was in at Rochester, both leading experts in the field. And Professor Daniels offered me a research assistantship the first year, so I didn't have to teach, which sounded fine. When I got there, though, it was not in gas phase reactions. It was in utilization of solar energy, which at that time was almost unheard of. This was back in 1952. Somehow, the project he wanted me to work on and I didn't hit it off together. I really didn't know which way to turn, how to handle it, and so on, and I got nowhere at all. And it was the year that Professor Daniels was president of the American Chemical Society. He was also chairman of the department, which meant basically he had no time for the students. I have to digress a bit here. At the end of the first year in graduate school, you had to take, I think they were called prelims, exams, and there were 4 of them: physical chemistry, organic chemistry, inorganic chemistry, and analytical chemistry. But you only had to take 3 of the 4. And the student supposedly could choose which one he was going to omit. I wasn't going to touch organic chemistry with a 10-foot pole. I felt I knew very little about it. It scared me to death. My own fault, but it really scared me. So I was opting for analytical chemistry as physical, inorganic, and analytical chemistry. But Professor Daniels was very clear that I had to take the organic. Well, we discussed this and argued this for months, literally. And I just wouldn't budge because I figured I'd never pass the organic one. You did have 2 chances. If you failed the first time, you could take it again a year later. And I held my ground, and Professor Daniels finally gave in and let me take the analytical. The result was I couldn't afford to fail analytical. Most people passed two the first time and flunked one, took that one again. So I figured I had no trouble with physical chemistry, and I studied like the devil on analytical chemistry and assumed I would probably not pass in organic chemistry, but that didn't bother me. I could take it a year later. Well, it turned out, first of all, I did pass all three the first time, but apparently they didn't give you grades, they just gave you fail or pass. But somehow it got out that I'd gotten one of the highest scores in analytical chemistry they'd ever seen, which was no surprise to me since I'd spent by far the majority of my time there. So back to now, what was happening between me and Professor Daniels. I heard the story many, many years later. I did not know it at the time. Professor Daniels talked to a young assistant professor who'd come straight from graduate school, from his PhD, and started teaching at Wisconsin the same time I arrived. In other words, a year before all this happened. He apparently talked to him and told him what my situation was and thought I'd be better off working for him, where I would have a lot of attention, getting to learn how to conduct research. And the young assistant professor was Irving Shane, who's a member of the society. Yeah. And he stopped me one day in the hall and said, if you ever want to change major professors, why don't you come and see me? I think I might be able to interest you in a problem. So I took him up on it, I went up to see him, and he snowed me. I didn't understand a word he was saying, but he did it in a way that intrigued me and made me want to find out, what the devil are you talking about? And so I went to work for him, and it was a problem in electrochemistry. Actually, he was in the analytical department, not the physical chemistry department, but the problem was a strictly physical chemistry one, which was exactly what I wanted, and that's how I got into electrochemistry. It was electroanalytical chemistry, similar to what Bard does. Well, not in a problem, but that type of chemistry. But there's so much overlap between the physical electrochemistry and analytical electrochemistry.
After Wisconsin, your next steps are to go work in this area with U.S. Steel in the Applied Research Laboratory?
That's right. That was my first position after getting my degree. And I wasn't hired specifically to be in the field of corrosion. I think I was hired to be an electrochemist. I think many people don't realize at that time, tin plate for making tin cans, primarily for food, but for other things too, was a major product for U.S. Steel. It was probably their biggest money maker. And so research on tin plate was a big thing with them. And I was in the group that did research on tin plate. And I did non-corrosion research on it, but I also did corrosion research. And this is how I slowly got into corrosion in my years at U.S. Steel. By the time I left there 4 years later, I knew I was headed into corrosion research. It just developed. I didn't make a quantum leap into it. It just slowly developed. My interest developed. There were other corrosion people there, and so on. From the applied lab, I was very fortunate to get a transfer into their fundamental lab. There were two separate labs in the same location, but absolutely separate. There was no communication to speak of between the two. And I went over to the fundamental lab, and there I was free to do almost anything in the area of electrochemistry and corrosion that I wanted to. And after a little bit slow start, I got into some corrosion research in basically two areas. One was localized corrosion of iron and some very specific iron alloys, and that was done jointly with Howard Pickering, also a member of the society. And then separately, I did work on the passivity of metals, particularly iron and some iron, high purity iron chrome alloys. And I was there, I think 16 and a half years, if I remember correctly. Or no, it was 12 and a half years, 16 and a half altogether at U.S. Steel.
I just have to ask, because it popped into my head when you mentioned your work in passivity. You did there was a great symposium and a book that you and Jerry Kruger put together around, well, you probably know the year, in the mid-'80s, early '80s?
I think it was published by the Society in 78 or 79.
Oh, okay. But where did Jerry Kruger come into your life and career?
What I remember is Jerry visited the fundamental lab once. I didn't know him at the time. He visited the fundamental lab, was invited by somebody else, but he and I had a chance to talk, and somehow we just found we had things in common. And the friendship developed slowly, but it got to be a very, very close one. And I think that Passivity Symposium had a lot to do with it. The passivities, I think we ran the 4th Passivity Symposium. There was one approximately every 5 years. And there were worldwide symposia. The first one was in Germany, the second one in Canada, the third one in Cambridge, England. And it was there that they asked both Jerry and me, but I think they really asked Jerry. I don't know whether he suggested me as a co-worker with him on it or whether they suggested without it, but I'm sure he was the big dog in passivity. And so we started off doing this together, and most of the work was really joint work where we both did it. When it came to the book, it turned out Jerry got sidetracked. He worked at what was then called the National Bureau of Standards, now NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology. He got pulled off to do other work, and he really didn't have much time to devote to the book, so the book fell primarily to me. And
well, I just couldn't help but thinking of Jerry. I mean, from my experience, the two of you have a sort of a connection to me and my career here because you're both in corrosion science and, of course, colleagues and friends you just explained. And both were treasurers at a time where I was doing a lot of the work in the accounting area for ECS. So I've had a chance to work with you in the exact same role as I did with Jerry Kruger. So so I didn't want to get sidetracked, but I had to, I don't know, learn a little bit more about that connection. In 1972, you left the fundamental laboratory at U.S. Steel to go to the fundamental laboratory in the world, right?
Right.
AT&T Bell Laboratories in Murray Hill, New Jersey. So when you reflect on, well, first of all, I guess why you decided to go there. I mean, I think there's some obvious reasons, but...
Yeah. Well, basically, U.S. Steel closed down the fundamental laboratory back in, well, they made the announcement in October of '71, and at that time, somewhere close to 40% of the staff was either fired or retired. I was one of the lucky ones who still had a job, but the fundamental lab no longer existed. We were all combined into the applied laboratory, and the applied laboratory's name was changed to just the research laboratory. There was no more applied or fundamental. At that time, I think many of my colleagues, decided, don't wait for the other shoe to drop. We started looking. Actually, but before we started looking, this is important, we all got busy trying to find jobs for those people who had lost their jobs. And I remember calling a colleague of mine who at that time was at Bell Labs. He actually was an Israeli on a 2-year sabbatical. He spent a year at a university, and then he was spending his second year in the research area, which is what the fundamental area was known as, the research area. He was in the research area in the physics department. I called him to see if he knew anything about that position that he had vacated at the university, because there was somebody at the lab who was a very, very fine electrochemist. I thought it'd be a perfect position for him. I don't remember what happened, where that went. But a few days later, after I talked with Yossi at Bell Labs, I get a call from Bell Labs. We heard what happened. Would you like to interview? They didn't offer me a job, but would you like to interview here for a position? At that time, I was really interested in going into academia. I wanted a university position, and I sent letters to many, many, many universities. But I've always had the philosophy, if somebody else wants to talk to you, don't say no before you know what they're offering. And I went and looked at several industrial positions that were open, including Bell Labs. One of my colleagues from U.S. Steel went to interview for the same position. He also interviewed for a university position, same one of the ones I interviewed for. As I think luck turned out, he got the university position, and I got the offer from Bell Labs. I'm very happy about that, because I've since concluded I would never have been good at a university position.
Well, was it? Did you get the call because they were looking for something in particular that you?
I don't know what they were looking for. Matter of fact, the person I interviewed with, the one who called me, was Barry Miller, who of course is well known in the society, and the one who interviewed me for his department was Paul Milner, who's also well known in the society.
Both past presidents.
They didn't say you have to do corrosion work or what. They said we want you. This was a condition at Bell Labs basically, and it was it was scary but wonderful at the same time. Paul told me, you're free to do anything you want, but it darn well better be at the frontiers of science. And we don't bother you. We let you work how you want to. But at the end of the year, you better have something to show for it. So, you were free to do what you wanted. I could come in whatever time I wanted, leave whatever time I wanted. I was completely my own boss, but once a year, I had to show what the result was. And that is scary.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it worked out well, and I carried over. At the beginning, I didn't have a laboratory. It took several months for me to get a laboratory because I had the responsibility. I was given a room, and I had the responsibility of deciding exactly how I wanted the lab designed, what I wanted in it, and so on. That takes some time,
Sure.
and then it takes even more time for construction of the lab. But it was exactly what I'd asked for. So anyway, I had no laboratory in which to work, and I was a lab person. So I decided I would continue some of the work I was doing at U.S. Steel and try to find. I'd gone from wet chemistry just before I left to some what I'll call dry chemistry. There was nobody at Bell Labs doing that, but I found somebody using an instrument that was new to me, but which served the same purpose. And in the first year, we turned out 2 papers there, and I think that secured my position at Bell Labs.
Well, and then you spent 24 years at the laboratories?
Something like that,
wow.
yeah.
And do you have some highlights that you could share?
2 general highlights were this business of openness, of being your own boss, was, it wasn't new to me. I had a certain amount of that in the fundamental lab, but more oversight than at Bell Labs. That, and the other part was the breadth, the scope of interest that Bell Labs had. At U.S. Steel, we were strictly a metallurgical laboratory. At Bell Labs, they were interested in subjects, well, I may have known of their existence, but that really they weren't even, to me, weren't science. It was psychology, economics, and others which I never thought of would be in any sort of research laboratory. And of course, in the physical sciences, everything you could think of. So the breadth was, and the people is the other thing. I mean, these were bright people. I didn't know whether I could keep up with them, so to speak. Some very, very brilliant people. And I'm not only talking about the Nobel Prize winners. They were in a class by themselves. And yes, I got to know every one of them, but no real interactions with any of them.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the ordinary members of technical staff who were brilliant, and I always felt it difficult to keep up with them.
Well, I think you did pretty well.
Well, I think I did. And there was one incident that perhaps in some ways was a highlight of my whole career. Despite some of the awards I got later on from ECS and outside the societies also, this little thing in a way meant more to me than anything else. It was middle of the afternoon. I was coming back, I believe, from the library, and I get to my office, and the secretary says, "Where have you been? Mr. Milner's been looking for you. He expected you an hour ago." I knew nothing about it. I said, "I didn't know anything. Nobody told me." Anyway, she escorted me down to Paul's office. When Paul saw me, he jumped up and essentially gave me the same greeting, except Mr. Laubscher has been waiting for you. Now, he was the director of the laboratory, Paul's immediate supervisor, whom I knew, but we had had no interactions at all. And we walk, and I'm scared to death. I don't know what's going on. Can't figure out what I did wrong. And I walk into his office, and he jumps up and congratulates me. I'd gotten an award, a Bell Labs award, which was limited to relatively low percentage of the people or staff. Well, that told me exactly where my standing was at Bell Labs, which meant an awful lot to me.
Yeah, that's a nice story, and that they shared it with you that way. Just, to mention, some of the other recognition. You've received the Society's Eulig Award in Corrosion Science. You're an ECS Fellow. You've also received our highest distinction, and that is the Atchison Award, which is both for your scientific achievement and your service. Did I miss any?
Yes.
Okay.
I remember.
Oh, well, yes. That's a bad one to miss because it's a different kind of award,
Right.
but the distinction is so exclusive, I guess, because in 114 years, I think we have 79 of them, and you're in pretty good company in that
Yes,
group.
when I got it, must have been, the society I think was 102 years old at the time, and I got it with Larry Faulkner and can't think of his first name, Roman Q.
Oh, Lubomir
So we were
Romankiw.
60, 61, and 62. Take which one was 60, which one was 61. But in 102 years, that meant something to me.
Yeah, I always, in talking about, honorary membership, I like to do a little name dropping, and say, yes, it's Thomas Edison and Leo Baekeland, who is essentially the inventor of plastic,
Right.
and Weston, of the Weston cell, and then the names go on and on. Gordon Moore, who is Intel's founder and credited with, of course, Moore's law and the evolution of the integrated circuit and computerization of the world, and so to be included in that group is really pretty special and well deserved in your case. Before we leave Bell Laboratories, we started talking about some of the society things. I'd just like you to share some things about Bell Laboratories' connection to ECS. It's really profound. Others that we've interviewed, have mentioned it. You lived it, and I think it would be interesting for you to share that with us.
Yeah. If you go back to the early 40s, I believe it was, Robert Burns, a member of Bell Labs, essentially saved the society. Society was rapidly going downhill. And I don't know the details of it. I just know the name. And after that, Bell Labs had a deep interest in the society. I must add here, they had a deep interest in most scientific societies. They encouraged the physicists to belong to the physical society. Electrochemists were encouraged to belong to the electrochemical society and be active in the society. So it wasn't just that they were interested in the electrochemical society, but in all societies. But I think there was a particular relationship between the society and Bell Labs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think 7 past presidents of the society have been members of Bell Laboratories for extended periods. Mm-hmm. Plus there have been some secretaries and a treasurer. So there's been a lot. And I know Paul Milner was very active, and he encouraged me to be active. Mm-hmm. There were numerous times when I went to him and said, the society has asked me to do this or that. Should I do it? Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, I think what must have been a big stepping stone toward eventually becoming president was my appointment as chair of the publication committee. And I went to Paul and said to him, I really don't think I want to do this. I was chair of the corrosion division at the same time, and I thought I had more than enough on my plate, and I argued against doing it, but he convinced me that I should do it. That's the sort of relationship that people at Bell Labs had with the society.
Right. 7 presidents, and as you said, several secretaries, at least 3 that I can think of. The influence is profound, and those people were special. But I also think and we had the proximity of being close to Bell Laboratories.
Oh, right.
That created a lot of interaction, and I believe they really brought this culture of discovery. They want you to produce, but it was how they enabled that to happen, which was kind of unique. And I think that influenced the society, and still does. I think it influences decisions we've made about both our meetings and our publications, and our discipline to stay true to our mission, which is really simply to advance the science. I think there's connections that they built in they hardwired us, that way, and certainly speaking for myself. So it's really very special to have that relationship, and of course we're speaking to you because you were a big part of that. So I'd like to move on and change the line of questioning a little bit to have you just talk about corrosion, the evolution of corrosion science, by taking a look at the beginning, at least as I understand it, and then maybe talking about where you think it's going or the influence it can have and things like that. So in the beginning, I've got a piece of information that our research team dug up that says the first convincing proof of corrosion being an electrochemical process was published in the Journal of the Electrochemical Society. At the time, it was called the Transactions of the American Electrochemical Society in 1903.
Who was the author?
Well, I'm about to share that here. The paper was by Willis R. Whitney. The title, I'm not sure I have the title, but there's a note here that said it persuaded many other works that corrosion held interest as an important electrochemical process. Well, and then there's a couple of other papers that are mentioned, one by C.J. Reed, The Protective Action of Zinc Chloride on Metallic Iron, and then one by a fellow by the name of A. Knudsen, The Corrosion of Metals by Electrolysis. So those are the beginnings, and I think that's an interesting fact, just from the standpoint of the society being involved in electrochemistry was at least one of the first to publish in this area. And we did it fairly convincingly in the first decade. There were 18 papers published. Remember that there were very, very few papers being published in any of the sciences, so we started accumulating them. And then, so really fast forward, we'll get to 1975, where the topic of infrastructure, in the United States anyway, becomes more prevalent. And there's a study being done that we're estimated to be about 80 billion in terms of the economic effects on corrosion of the infrastructure, which at the time was 5% of the gross national product. So that's a pretty long time ago, to be recognizing this problem. It almost feels like we should have been making a greater investment in trying to solve it. So what do you think about that moving forward?
I'm aware of that study. I was much more aware of it at the time. It's quite a while ago, so my memory isn't that great. There was a very recent study I saw, I don't remember where, which showed much higher numbers. Of course, everything has gone up, so we can't compare the two directly, and somewhat 3.1 or 3.2% of the gross national product. So perhaps as a function of the gross national product, the cost of corrosion has gone down somewhat, but it still isn't horribly high figure. It's in the hundreds of billions of dollars annually. And much of that could be prevented simply by using existing knowledge. It doesn't require anything that we don't know today. But to repeat what I said earlier, the government and the people don't see the value of investing in corrosion research. On the other hand, I have to also say, while there's been a tremendous advance in understanding the fundamentals of corrosion, electrochemistry, and the other factors involved, metallurgical factors, they have not translated into many new products or alloys for use. That's come more from applied research than from fundamental research. But we never know how much the fundamental research, what role the fundamental research played in the applied development work. So I think continuing the fundamental work, the basic work, is important, and it's progressed steadily over the years. When I entered the field back in the 50s, it was primarily electrochemical research. That has continued, but we've seen other things. When I went to Bell Labs, I essentially changed my direction, still doing chemistry, but instead of looking at the passive films like I had been, or studying the mechanism of passivity, I started studying the nature of the films that formed on metals. And this was done with instrumentation which was available which was used for other things, but had not been applied to corrosion. So in that sense, I did something novel by applying particularly Auger electron spectroscopy and XPS to corrosion, and started a new field there. But that then progressed to other instruments being used, and particularly later on, different forms of microscopy. And I can't even begin to tell you all the different techniques that have been developed to look at surfaces down at the atomic level even. And so corrosion research has advanced in many, many ways. And one would think it would probably continue advancing.
I think what you said about a good deal of the fundamental research has already been done that can help with these type of problems today. And I'd just like to make a connection just for a moment to, back to the Electrochemical Society in our role, in advancing science. And of course we do that through dissemination, and how we're changing our ideas about dissemination. And that's one of the reasons that with the problem the world's facing, it's become more, and this has been a significant change in my experience at ECS, just the relevancy of electrochemistry to sustainability in a lot of areas, everything from the infrastructure to health, to water, energy, and so call it sustainability. And what you said about that a lot of this research has been done, and I think there's a responsibility on our part and others who disseminate research to share, to do a better job of sharing that research. So we've changed our publishing philosophy and are moving towards what we call the Free the Science initiative, where we're creating, we hope ultimately, an open forum for people to access this great body of research. That's a whole lot different from your days as the Publications Committee Chair, isn't it?
Very different. Back in roughly the 20th century, publication meant putting out a journal, which was a costly process, and it was funded basically by page charges by the authors or for the institution for which they worked, and by the subscribers of the journals who read the papers and used them. And we've come a long way since then. As far back as I can remember, there was objections to page charges. And that became much more severe, I would say probably in the 1960s, 1970s, I don't remember exactly, when commercial publishers entered the field. I remember, I don't know when it was, before I was really very active in the society, one of the commercial publishers wanted to buy the journal. And I didn't have anything to do with the decision. I was nowhere near that. But the powers that be decided against it, for which I'm now very glad and happy that that happened. But the commercial publishers were out looking to make money, and they could do many different things. Among them was no page charges, which thereby attracted papers from papers they wanted to get for the journal. So they were able to get some very good papers. Well, that cost them money, but they could charge whatever they wanted to in the way of subscription prices. And the libraries or even the industrial labs had no choice but to go along with these fantastic subscription prices. Right. The people working there or using the libraries needed them, wanted them, so they were paying, I forget now what they were, what our subscription prices were, but it was at least an order of magnitude more than what our subscription prices were to the same institutions. And so they basically made money at the expense of the authors, and the institutions that wanted to use the thing. And it was a subject to many discussions at the ECS.
Still is. Well, it's, you know, and I mean, it's come back to the forefront in a well, it's always been there. I guess it's the volume's been increased on this issue because of number one, the pricing. You know, it's become this commodity, a commercial commodity, right? And I think the second issue is what I was alluding to before. It's not just that they're commoditizing this, you know, and reselling it and straining library budgets or straining author budgets. You know, it's inhibiting people, important people in various research communities, from getting research that now is connected to the future of the planet. And I can go way outside of electrochemistry, and you know, let's talk about government or foundation-funded cancer research that's being sold the same way.
Yeah.
And so you know, back to the society's role and the position we've taken. How can we possibly be true to our mission if we you know, sell our publications or contract for services to sell them that way? Because our job is to disseminate as broadly as we can, and we clearly know the prices are obstacles. And you were just explaining too that over time, with the strain on the library budgets, there's fewer and fewer subscriptions they can afford.
Right.
And so, you know, ultimately fewer and fewer libraries are able to have as many of the research journals. And in a multidisciplinary field like electrochemistry, you can get left off the chemistry pile or left off the physics pile or chem engineering or electrical engineering. You know, somebody within any university or a group within a university has to, you know, step up and value that particular area. And so it's a problem, and which is again why we've changed our philosophy about how we go about our publishing.
Well, I think it's to the Society's credit, though, that the subject has always been open for discussion. There was never a point where we buried our head in the sand and said, forget about it. So it's been subject to discussion, and in the end, I think you're tackling it the right way now. I marvel at what you've come up with. First, the open access, and then the long term, the free science.
Well, I appreciate that. As I said, I think it's still, this comes from this Bell Laboratories influence and this commitment to the importance of the mission of the organization that the leaders like yourself have really always had. I think it would be an interesting way to begin to wrap up this conversation by you know, talking a little bit about some of these leaders themselves. You know, maybe a few names we didn't mention that, you know, that may have influenced you or people or in your scientific discipline. Are there some special people you want to talk to tell us about?
Most of them would be other people in the corrosion field. Society, of course, is so big. One person rarely knows people in other disciplines. So,
well, then let me give you some names.
Right, okay.
Norman Hackerman.
Well, I was going to name 3 or 4 people.
Oh, okay.
Who Hackerman, Uhlig, Kruger, whom you mentioned before, and I think Morris Cohen also belongs in that group. Hackerman, in some ways, I know the most about and the least about. He was active in the Society before I really got involved. Yes, he was editor of the journal for I don't know how many years, but I didn't know him, I didn't interact with him, I didn't see him at meetings and so on. So he was just a name. So I really can't say very much about him in the past. I got to know him very well when I was chairman of the publication committee and an editor for corrosion for the journal. But I never was there when he was influencing the science. The dissemination of the science, yes, but not the science itself. So I'm somewhat limited. Herb Eulig, on the other hand, was always there. He was an amazing man in many ways. He was a hands-on man in the society and in the corrosion division and in the field of corrosion research. He went to every meeting dealing with corrosion, not just ECS meetings, but others too. And he had his own theories on things. And while many people may have disagreed violently with him on some of his ideas, everybody respected him.
Mm-hmm.
And he was just the sort of man you had to respect.
Mm-hmm.
And
well,
so he remains, in my memory, is much more so than Norman does. Norman does also, but I just felt a much closer relationship
mm-hmm.
To Herb than to Norman.
And I have to mention, for our record here, that the worldwide respect for Herb Eulig that you just mentioned, a lot of that comes from, he's the guy that wrote the book on it, so to speak.
That's true, that's true.
The Corrosion Handbook.
I forgot about that, but absolutely, which is it's still in existence now. It's in, I think, 3rd edition and has been changed significantly, but it was a monumental work, and that certainly brought him, everybody in the field of corrosion knew who Eulig was.
Mm-hmm.
But then I think Kruger had a lot of influence on the society. And I know I've said to Jerry many times as I was going through the ranks, so to speak, I thought he should have been president of the society. I didn't see myself ever going to that position. I thought he should have. And in many ways, until, he died 2 or 3 years ago, I forget exactly when. To me, he was the leader of the corrosion community. Mm-hmm. So I was somewhat surprised when you called me the leader of the corrosion community. I thought Jerry deserved a lot of credit. He got it from the corrosion division, but I'm not sure he got what he deserved from others.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know he was really revered within the organization. People from the standpoint of there's, to a person that knew him, thought a great deal of him. He just was a great human being.
Absolutely.
And there was another?
Morris Cohen was the other one. It was not so much his relationship to the society, I guess. He was active as a presenter, as a speaker, as a scientist, but I don't think he was ever involved in running the society or the corrosion division. But I think he influenced a lot of people on the science of corrosion. Mm-hmm. So I do want to mention him. And unfortunately, he passed away. It's quite a few years now. He was relatively young still.
Mm-hmm. Before we wrap it up, I just want to not ask a question and ask you if you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share.
Well, I've always had the Electrochemical Society, the Corrosion Division, and the Society have always been almost a second home to me in terms of my professional career. It was accidental, it wasn't planned, but it's the way it went. Mm-hmm. And I'm very grateful for that, because society gave me opportunities that I never dreamed of. When I got out of school, never even thought of being the chair of the corrosion division, let alone president of the society. I never considered myself of that caliber, and I still wonder sometimes about it. So I'm very grateful to the society, and it's due to the way the society is run, and it's due to the people in the society. When it's accepted, people are accepted in the society. You don't have to be have a big name and things like that. You're accepted for what you are and the work you do. So it's brought me closer than I would have ever expected to be to any organization.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know the Electrochemical Society is grateful that you made this your home. So, and thank you for sharing this with us today, Bob.
Thank you.